The material and information contained within the Chatting with Cumberland podcast is for general information purposes only. You should not rely upon the material or information on the website as a basis for making any business, legal, or other decisions. While we endeavor to keep the content and resources of Chatting with Cumberland current and accurate, the Cumberland Board of County Commissioners, Administration, and all departments and affiliates make no representations or warranties of any kind, express or implied, about the completeness, accuracy, reliability, suitability, or availability with respect to services, show content, and guest opinions contained on the Chatting with Cumberland for any purpose. The views and opinions expressed on the show are not representative of that of county commissioners, administration, or employees unless expressly specified. The Chatting with Cumberland podcast will be discussing sensitive topics such as suicide, sexual abuse, drug use, mental health, and domestic violence. Viewer discretion is advised. Hi, everybody. This is Chatting with Cumberland. Beth Thomas?
Hey, Frank.
Hey, what's going on?
Nothing. We have a guest in the house. I'm
We
so
do.
excited.
Hi, everyone.
Today I'd like to welcome Ms. Jennifer Webb-McRae, the prosecutor for Cumberland County. Jen, it's an honor for you to be here today. We're so happy to see you in the hot seat. And what is our topic that we're covering today, Beth?
Today we're going to be talking about domestic violence.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Jen, for coming and showing up. Just a little context for folks. 10 years ago in 2010, right, Jen?
Mm-hmm.
I had the opportunity to intern for Jennifer on the year of your appointment. Am I right?
Yeah, January of 2010 is when I started.
I just wanted to say to the people out there, for all the law and justice majors and studies, interning for the prosecutor's office was, as a criminal justice major, the most impactful work that I've done in my life in terms of the impression that it left on me. We were in the rotation. For each week, I was in a different section. So we had, family crimes, we had violent crimes, narcotics. I got to go, for those who know, in the state of New Jersey, you have to keep murder evidence indefinitely, right?
Yes.
So they have a lot of old cases at the bottom of the courthouse. I was tasked with cleaning some things up. That was pretty cool. Best experience of my life, and I hope that for all the law and justice studies out there, that you have an opportunity to do something half as cool, because it was really fun.
Yeah, and our evidence is not, our cases are not there anymore. We now have a much better system.
You have a much
Thank
better-
you for your part in getting us to where they were organized so we could put them on
That's cool.
public record storage.
Is everything done electronically now? No?
No, we actually have to keep the physical files for all the murders, but we now have them in a much better facility that's
Cool.
more modern and up to date. So,
That's super
good
cool.
stuff.
It was really neat to be able to go through that as a learning student. So it's good. If you had told me 10 years ago, Jen, that you'd be back sitting here with us on the show, I would have said you're crazy.
Yeah, I'm a survivor.
You sure are. You hung in there. I guess I came back around, huh? That's pretty funny. Anyway, so our topic today is domestic violence. We wanted to start off the show for our viewers out there. Thank you so much for supporting us. We're going to get right into it. We're going to play a clip for you, Jen, and cut to the clip for you viewers from our first story of J.O.B. It's called The Testimony of J.O.B. And in that clip, he goes through some of his experience with domestic violence or violence in the home. And we'll have you watch that, and we'll see you in just a minute. Sound good?
Yep.
All right.
My mother and my father were both involved in a very traumatic incident that left us, the three of us, in a foster home. I had some very formative experiences in this foster home.
Tell us a little bit about it. What's on your mind? What happened?
My foster parents were abusive. The children were out of control. The oldest child had some issues with violence. He liked to put his hands on the rest of us. I routinely remember being thrown across the room by him. The middle child, who was 13, liked to set fires. Something I'm sure is a troubling sign to all the psychiatrists out there. Then were my brothers and I, who didn't do much of anything except get tossed around.
After watching a clip from Testimony of J.O.B., and I wanted to get your feedback on what you thought of what you heard, Jen.
Well,
Okay.
what I heard, I think that's family violence. And, obviously as parents, we have a duty to keep our children or those in our care safe. So when you have siblings or other, children in the home that are committing acts of violence or abuse on children, it's actually a form of neglect and child abuse, because we have a responsibility to keep, each of our children safe from each other.
Right.
I remember at one point having a conversation with my niece who was playing with my son, and she was several years older than him, and they were just roughhousing. And he ended up with a black eye. She hadn't punched him. It's the aggressive wrestling on the floor. And, the conversation was that now he has a black eye as a result of this, play roughhousing that you're doing. And I have an obligation to keep him safe and an obligation to make sure that you're not participating in behavior that could harm either one of you. And it sounds to me that what was going on in that family environment was a form of neglect from the perspective that the adults in the home weren't keeping all of the children safe.
Understandably. So, in your position now as the prosecutor of Cumberland County, what are some of the roles that you take on day to day that may involve domestic violence as an overall subject?
Well, obviously, domestic violence in its most extreme form is a form of violence, which is crime, right? So we have murder cases that have a facet of domestic violence. We have serious assault cases that are, have a facet of domestic violence. We have stalking cases
Right.
that have a facet of domestic violence. So domestic violence in its most extreme form is a crime. In our state, though, you can have a form of domestic violence which has been deemed to be handled in family court. It's a civil form of domestic
Right.
violence. And that's serious as well, because we as a society have to make sure that everyone feels safe in their homes. We have to make sure that situations don't escalate because there are weapons in the home. And we all know that there are studies that indicate that when a weapon is in the home, that there are more chances, particularly with women, that they'll end up dead as a result of domestic violence. And oftentimes those cases are handled in the civil realm rather than in the criminal realm.
If you had to spitball it, right? What is the ratio of women victims, right, to men in the topic of domestic violence?
I would probably say that in terms of the cases we see, probably 90 to 95% or greater are female victims with male perpetrators. And I think that probably has something to do with the stigma in society that men are supposed to be strong, men are supposed to, be in control. So there's probably a stigma with men reporting domestic violence. We absolutely know that men and boys can be victims of domestic violence as well. But because of the power differential in society and also physically, oftentimes men have an advantage to exert power and control because of financial resources. Even in society, men make more money than women because of our cultural, cultural mores that, men are the head of their households. That's changing, but it hasn't really changed that much. And, the fact that men control a lot of the income that comes into a household. They can, and their physical presence, women being smaller, just by physical attribute, less powerful, they can exert physical control in a way sometimes that women are not able to do. But, we challenge ourselves as criminal justice professionals to actually realize that we have to create environments where men can report domestic violence as well, and where we can make sure that we're protecting them.
Now, let me ask you, Jen, just to play devil's advocate for a second, right? Would you say that are those same social mores that you've kind of talked about that have maybe separated the lane between male and female, do you think that maybe because certain instances revolving masculinity, that maybe domestic violence is occurring with the victim being male or underreported? Or do you think they're just not as happening as much?
I think there's a stigma in our society, at least in American society, where men may feel ashamed to report domestic violence. I also think that culturally, or I don't even want to say culturally, I want to say society-wise, we have to be careful, and we have to acknowledge that we've created the perfect storm for hyper-masculinity.
Yeah.
The access that adolescent boys have to porn online, the games that they're playing, in terms of the weapons and the figures and the heroes. They're all strong. They're all military. They're all hyper, masculinized. I think that contributes to the messages that we send to boys in particular in our society as to how they, if they wanted to assume that role, have a role over women and how we treat women in society. So we have to be careful of that. I mean, it's in our music, it's in our movies, and I'm not saying that we should censor things, but we as parents have a responsibility to model, behaviors where men and women have a say in partnerships, and also in the way men and young boys treat girls and women in our society.
Yeah. And I think mines are like parachutes; they only function when open, right? And hearing the full subject on terms of a woman's perspective and a man's perspective, and I think one of the things that we do here, chatting with Cumberland, is take personal stories and make them relatable. And the question I'll ask you, Jen, is: do you have a personal experience with domestic violence that maybe inspired you in some of the work that you're doing? Because I know that this was one of the subjects you were very passionate about from the beginning when we discussed chatting with Cumberland, and we're so glad to have you here.
I think that what I would say about that is that I think if you're a woman in America and probably in the world, that you have an experience with men exerting power over you from the top down, meaning, there's a constant national discussion about women having control over their personal reproductive systems, about women having a say in, society. It's only we're celebrating 100 years from the time we've had a right to make decisions about voting.
Right, Susan B.
So
Anthony.
it's not so far. It's not so far off.
Yeah.
Obviously, in my personal life, in my community, there is, domestic violence has affected my life through experiences that I've had with family members and with friends. In the African American culture, I remember hearing my grandmother say, first time shame on me, but second time shame on you. And, we think of domestic violence as a private family problem sometimes, and it's really not just a private family problem. There are studies that talk about the fact that, business is interrupted when women have to stay home because they're injured by domestic violence. Families are, affected when children witness domestic violence and then manifest that trauma by either, having a predisposition to repeat the cycle as perpetrators or victims. So it's really everyone's problem. And I sometimes, even today, fight that internal feeling of, well, if my girlfriend, if I tell her, I can help you and let's, see what we can do to get you out of this situation. If she doesn't take my advice, why am I going to help her again? But when you become more knowledgeable, when you become more aware of the cycle of domestic violence, when you become more aware of the things that make people stay in situations that are not healthy or safe for themselves or their children, you become more empathetic to, what are these things that keep people in these cycles that are not healthy for them or their families.
Right. So where do we start? Where does one start if they feel that maybe they've seen domestic violence or they've been a victim of domestic violence or a third party kind of involved in a situation? What would you recommend to them being a starting point?
Well, I think that we have to first start by realizing that it's not just a private problem, that it's a problem for everybody that affects us all. We've had serious cases where people were, bystanders to domestic violence and ended up dead. There's a retired police officer, Carmen D. Gregorio, that I celebrate his memory and legacy every year, who, because of his training, intervened in a serious domestic violence incident and ended up getting killed. That's right here in Cumberland County. We have women, that have been under my tenure that we've had to prosecute murder cases, because they were killed as a result of domestic violence. So it's everyone's problem. So we have to start with that. We have to empower victims to realize that we are going to meet them wherever they are at any time to help them. And we're not going to shame them if it's the second or third time that we reach out to help them. We're going to meet them where they are and when they're ready to get help. We have to understand that this is something that, affects young people. So we have to be talking about safe and healthy dating habits, recognizing the signs that lead to situations where you feel trapped, helping people become aware of the resources that are available in our community to help them get out of situations that they can't handle by themselves.
Right.
It's not just one thing. I think it's all of us rowing in the same direction to end, what I call the chains or the legacies of family violence and particular domestic violence.
I've been reading some articles that say that the first step for many people is just being aware that they're even in a domestic violence situation.
Hit the nail on the head.
Well, this is what I was reading.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they do, trying to figure out what is the next step because of everything you mentioned. You have the stigma, you have the fear, you have the financial situation. And then also what I was reading, and you could tell me if you've experienced this, is that a lot of people, even after they leave, they have the stalking, sometimes like you mentioned. And that could be even if the person is remarried, they'll still stalk an older relationship. And then they said that our family courts also don't help because they have the children have unsupervised visits with the person who was violent with their mother. So do you see any changes in that situation since you've been in your office?
Well, I think that it becomes with awareness. Like, obviously, prosecutors need to be educated, judges need to be educated, people who work in the systems need to be educated. It's a balancing. If there was domestic violence in the family and it was perpetrated against the spouse, not the children, obviously parents don't lose their right to co-parent and participate in their children's lives based on one act. If I were ever in the family court's shoes, I would say I need to get the family what they need, counseling, support services, what have you, and then I need to figure out what's safe for the children so they can still have a relationship with the perpetrating parent. And, that may be counseling for the perpetrating parent, that may be supervised visitation, it might be at some point unsupervised visitation. So that's a complicated issue.
Sure.
And it's very hard and frustrating to solve. But, oftentimes, particularly I think women feel that they stay because they feel like they're protecting their children from the perspective of, if I leave, we're not going to have a place to live. If I leave, it's going to cause a financial impact that's going to affect my children. I can just stay here and take the physical violence part of it, or the emotional violence part of the domestic violence, because my children are fed, my children have a roof over their head.
Sure.
I think that once we start talking to women about the long-lasting effects of domestic violence, your daughter is more likely to accept and think it's normal to be in a relationship where a husband and wife or paramours behave in this way if she witnesses it into her young adult life. Your son is more likely to be a perpetrator of domestic violence if he witnesses it and thinks that that's normal or acceptable behavior throughout his young adult life. I think that's part of empowering women to say, well, I got to look at what is the greater good. And then, as a society and as professionals, we have to think of what systems can we put in place that the victim doesn't suffer.
Right. That they feel
and,
supported.
And there are, yes, we have our horror stories from family court, but I know of a number of stories where the perpetrator is removed from the home and the parent and the victim gets to stay there and support is provided. So there are, things that are put in place so that, the family doesn't suffer as a result of an act that they didn't have control over.
That's nice to know.
So what would you say separates, let's say, a domestic violence incident between maybe that or a scuffle between, let's say, two spouses? Where does that line kind of cross over into domestic violence, and what stuff?
A scuffle between two spouses is a form of domestic violence. Sometimes there's not a lot of black and white lines in criminal justice or in family relationships, right? So sometimes in that scuffle, it's hard to tell who is the perpetrator and who is
Right.
is the victim. But what we need to be kind of empowering and teaching young people is any form of a physical violence is not okay. Any form of physical exertion against another person is not okay.
Yeah.
And obviously, if I tell my two children that stop roughhousing because somebody's going to get hurt, I'm maybe not calling that a domestic violence issue. But if one person says, I don't want to participate anymore, and you continue, then that kind of gets into that gray area where maybe it's a problem.
Yeah.
So it's a tough one, but I like to think of bright line rules, and I just with my I only have one son, but I have stepchildren, and with my grandchildren, it's no physical roughhousing, and that's a good bright line rule to not get to that next level, right? And physical is easy, right? But when we talk about some of the other types and forms of domestic violence, it's a little harder to tell, in the sense that what is emotional, violence?
Yeah.
What is financial violence?
Yeah.
Would it be that if you make me mad, I stop giving you my paycheck? Yes,
Yeah.
that's likely to be it. But usually things start subtly and then they move into, escalating levels.
Yeah.
So it's tough, it's really tough to define it all the time.
Well, not to make light of the situation, but I used to watch a show called Cops. I'm sure you're familiar with it, right? And they would have the domestic violence situations where both had physical scars, right? And I would try to decide which one initiated it, which side, it was a horrible.
Defending.
I was wrong 78% of the time. It was so tricky to kind of get to the bottom of that. And one of the things that I think that's super important is just the awareness. Having this conversation, we said, removing the stigma, that's part of it. And we encourage others to be able to come on the show and tell their story and how it relates, and tell your story and what the prosecutor's office is doing currently to combat, the dark conversations, I think, behind.
Well, one thing that we do is that we have victim witness advocates And they
Okay.
actually are going out to municipal courts and covering domestic violence, like municipal court cases that have the domestic violence element. So simple assaults. It's interesting. It could be harassment. It could be criminal mischief. If the criminal mischief
Yeah.
is, you didn't go on this date with me, so I busted out your windows of your car, right?
Yes.
Right.
So they go out much in the same way as they attend the DV hearings, even though that's family court, not criminal court. We have a victim advocate there at each of those hearings to be available to talk to the victims about the cycle of domestic violence, as well as what resources we have that can help people. And that's really important to get to.
Does that
So-
happen before the hearing or after the hearing?
Right at the beginning of the hearing, the judge talks about, is there anybody in the audience who wants to dismiss their case? And if they say that they want to dismiss their case, they at least let them go out, speak with somebody from SERV, somebody from our office about, are you sure? Are you being pressured? Those type of things, so that they know that, it's a voluntary decision to do that. And then they're also there at the domestic violence court so that if someone wants services, they can hook them up with services, even if there's a finding of domestic violence. So that's at final restraining orders.
Is there a way to do that before you get to the hearing?
Well,
I mean, I'm
there's
just thinking
also
if I'm
advocates. So when someone reports to the police that there's been an act of domestic violence, they apply for a temporary restraining order. So before COVID, we would have people from SERV that were trained volunteers that would go out and speak to people about domestic violence, and also let them know what services were available.
Okay.
Since COVID, it's been more they would give them the opportunity to speak with them by phone or by video to do the same things. And I actually think that's a better system. It's faster, it's quicker, it makes it more accessible for people, less time consuming. So, there's pages we can take from learning how to innovate during COVID that will make things better for the future. But they do have that ability as well. So
And that's not just criminal, that's in this other
that's
court.
family,
It's
yes,
both.
family court
Okay.
as well. So that's two bites at the apple right there. And also, if there's sometimes there's a simple assault, a criminal mischief, or harassment, or some other type of charge, didn't rise to the level of criminal. It's a disorderly persons down in municipal court. But we've sent our advocates out to the municipal courts. They have special days where they do those cases, so that someone's on site to speak with, a victim and get them help. Even if they don't want to pursue the charge, they can still get the help. So it's important to mention, and she was supposed to be here today, but she's not feeling well, that Cumberland County's domestic violence provider is the Center for Family Services, who we lovingly call SERV. And there is a 24-hour hotline. It's 1-800-225-0196 in Cumberland County. And, you can call that number at any time to get help. They also have a safe house, and that's for like the most extreme circumstances where somebody has to get out of the home with their children. For Gloucester and Cumberland counties, we at my office support that safe house from the perspective that at Christmas time we always do a toy drive and get toys for the kids. And I know other people, the public and other agencies in the community support the safe house so that they have toiletries, the things that they need to make it comfortable there. In addition to that, SERV sends advocates to domestic violence court, and they have that program where if you're interested or you're a survivor of domestic violence and you want to give back to the community, you can become a volunteer who goes out when those incidents happen and talks to the victims and tells them what's available in the community and warns them to be mindful of the cycle of domestic violence. So there's support there. They also have domestic violence support groups in our community, and I know they've done a really good job of transforming that to a virtual platform so that people can still get support. And finally, there is a Peaceful's Tomorrow program, which is a program where parents and the children can together go through group therapy to heal themselves from, the ravages of domestic violence. So they do a lot in our community. They're a wonderful partner. This month is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, so I encourage anybody who's watching to go to the Cumberland County Prosecutor's Office Facebook page, because I've been posting national resources and information about domestic violence as well, so they can get the national hotline number and more information about domestic violence. So there are a lot of resources in the community, and I just want to stress that, my job, I feel like part of my job as a criminal justice professional is raising awareness about the issue and, empowering people to access the services that are here in our community to combat this very serious issue.
Can you tell us, Jen, how you came into your appointment, like as a prosecutor, as a law student to the prosecutor, and what some of your plans are for the future in terms of your action?
Well, yes, I will, but let me tell you about this one more thing with domestic violence first. We are having a Stand Out Against Domestic Violence program, and that is at Rowan College of South Jersey, formerly Cumberland County College, wonderful little gem in our community. And that's on Wednesday, October 21st, 2020, from 1 to 3 p.m.
We'll put it in the description for you.
Yeah, at
sure.
first, and I'll send you the link to the flyer. There first is at 1 o'clock, opening remarks by the Vice President of the college, Dr. James Pacone. There's a panel discussion at 1:15 with myself, with Samantha Robbins from SERVE, and Lorena Diaz. She's the Director of Victim Witness for my office, and Nathaniel Aldridge from the college. And then at 2, we have a Stand Out Against Domestic Violence event that we do every year at the college, where we recognize, unfortunately, the numerous victims who have died of domestic violence in our community. And we hear stories of survivors. So it's sad, but it ends on a good note, because we demonstrate that there are survivors of domestic violence in our community that can be a help and a resource for other people struggling with it. And we do a call to action. So that's on Wednesday, October 21st, 2020. You have to register online. It's virtual. And you can, if you are a victim of domestic violence or you want to be an advocate for victims, write an I Stand With Survivors note that will be shared during that event. So go to the Cumberland County Prosecutor's Office Facebook page. Several links. Just look up domestic violence and they'll come up, and register for that important program. So I became prosecutor in 2010. I never set out to be prosecutor. I always wanted to be a Superior Court judge. And I had a mentor that I clerked for after law school, Judge Stanger, who later became our assignment judge. And he, from the time I was a baby lawyer, encouraged me and made sure that I served on committees that would put me in a light or a position to be poised to be a Superior Court judge. And then this opportunity came up to be prosecutor. And I, was a little shocked that I was given the opportunity, but it made sense from the perspective that I had worked in criminal justice all my career. I think I had been in practice for about 14 years before I came about 12, 13 years before I became prosecutor. And I was a public defender. I did criminal defense work. And really, being county prosecutor gives you the opportunity to shape what justice looks like in our community. So it's really been a privilege. It's a privilege to be the fruit of the labor of my parents and my grandparents, who did a lot of hard work to pour a lot of resources in me to give me this opportunity. To be the first woman and first African-American prosecutor of our county.
I know that's right.
Yeah.
Hey,
So,
congratulations, Jennifer.
Thank you.
We're going to wrap it up here, and we thank you so much for being on with us. We hope that you'll come back for a special segment that we're working on that'll show you interacting with some of the youth. We're excited to hear about that, and thank you for being a first-day believer in this project also.
Absolutely. I want to say one more thing before we wrap up. COVID has presented a challenge in so many facets of society, and people are suffering. They're in the midst of a magnification of suffering with domestic violence because, normally we're going out into the world, we're working, we're sending our kids to school, and we've spent so much time at home that I worry that, people don't feel like they have an outlet to report their problems or to get away or escape from what's going on at the home. And I just want to, say to anyone who might be experiencing that today, take the time to call the 1-800 number. It's 800-225-0196, or to go to the Center for Family Violence, which is Family Services, which is www.centerffs.org, and look up domestic violence services, because there is help out there in the community. There are people that will meet you where you are, and no one should ever have to suffer alone. So please, if you can't reach them, reach out to my office. If you're in a dire situation, call 911, and there is help for you in this community. We stand with you, we support you. No one should have to suffer alone.
Thank you so much for being here, Jen.
Thanks,
Frank, I just want to remind you that a lot of these resources will be available underneath our
Yep.
YouTube video.
We'll put it right in the details and on the screen for all you folks out there who can use them, and please feel free to share them. And this has been another episode of the Keeping It Real sessions, chatting with Cumberland, Jennifer Webb-McRae, Beth Thomas. Tune in, turn up, and get lifted.
Good morning, it's John Fuqua. I want to give a shout out to Chatting with Cumberland podcast. Frank and Beth, you guys are doing an unbelievable, amazing job covering some great topics here for Cumberland County audience. I want to encourage you guys to keep doing what you're doing. Today's guest on your show is going to be Prosecutor Jennifer Webb-McRae, and I wanted to ask Ms. McRae a question, if possible. How do you balance doing your job as the chief law enforcement agent for Cumberland County with also providing opportunities for crime prevention? How do you balance that, and why are you so passionate about helping prevent crime? That's a question for Madam McRae. Again, shout out to Frank and Beth at Chatting with Cumberland podcast. Keep up the great work, and I'll see you guys soon.